Saturday, March 25th. I timed that pretty good. So, Saturday, March 25th. And I am probably going to change my my show to Saturdays. I'm still kind of deciding. I heard a bunch of, what is it called, Sirius Radio? Whatever the stuff they have in the cars is now. I think they're all like one company because they failed so miserably. They just all had to join each other in their suckage. So I'm listening to that and going through. And I got to tell you, it's really not worth the money. It's not that much money. And it's definitely better than AM, FM. So, if you get a great deal, no biggie. But it's a really, especially on a Saturday night, oh my Lord. Oh, it's like mind-numbing. And they're competing with all of our Facebook naughty groups. So it's, it's not cool. But I think it might be a good night for me because I'm sure people are intellectually starving, even more so than through the week, and hoping they could just kind of hear something that might make some sense to them instead of the kind of, constant kind of melancholy that we've fallen into because everybody doesn't know what they're talking about and isn't even trying. I probably don't know what I'm talking about either, but at least I'm trying. So, what are we talking about today? Well, remember back when we were in high school and we were getting all sorts of higher math, and everyone was talking about how we're never going to use it. They were mostly right. And there's a lot of higher math that you don't need unless you go into STEM. And it's this weird thing that we're competing on math. That's what we compete on with other countries. I think it's really just like math and English or, whatever language that's your main language in the country. So I guess it would be math and language arts without any of the art, just, know your basic language, know your, the language, your predominant language in your country. And that's kind of what we compete on. I don't even know if they look at the social studies tests that I got all throughout junior high and high school. The foreign language tests, I had a couple of regents in. Yeah, I was in New York, so I had a regents. I think only California and New York do that now. So we have this really messy, kind of incompetent educational system. And I kind of took a Descartesian step back. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if I could design a curriculum for me, what I've needed from my mid-20s till now, what would I put in that curriculum and what would I take out of the current curriculum? I'm not too familiar with the current curriculum, but I have seen some of the Common Core stuff. And again, it's about competing on math, and I don't get it. Honestly, what we should be doing is putting our resources to people who are good at math and then, giving them those STEM educations. It's almost like a free ticket, right? Because so many of us really aren't. I was very good at geometry, a little bit of trigonometry, algebra 1, stuff like that. Maybe even algebra 2. Algebra 3, I was lost. Pre-calc, calculus, college math, the real college math. That's supposed to be even after that. I don't even understand that there is subjects after that, but evidently there are. And then we had, I remember statistics I aced the shit out of. And they had statistics because I was in a psychology curriculum, so statistics was actually a serious course in that. Now, we are really, 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 I said it thrice, so you know it's important, screwing up our children as far as giving them the skills they need for life. And I think it's even it's almost a bit sexist. I'm not saying this because I'm a feminist. At least I'm not a third wave feminist. I'm a egalitarian, so I'm more of a second wave or a first wave feminist. But I think especially women are getting these kind of educations that aren't helping them at all. Now, this is really not about college. This is about high school. College is a whole other discussion. But what we had is we have this primary and secondary ed. That's like your grade school, your intermediate school, and then your high school. And it was always thought of as, okay, we need to put stuff in here to prepare everybody for life. And if they want to go on to college, then that's that. Now, despite being a bit of a Bernie-crat in some ways, I was not big on his whole let's make college 13th grade idea, because I've been through that. I went to a university system called CUNY in New York, and they're basically like that. You're just getting kind of like different. You're not getting like a higher level of anything. You're just getting a different mix of classes. And honestly, you could have had them in high school, and it wouldn't have made a difference. In fact, it may have boosted your grades, because making room for it would get rid of some other things that are totally useless. And like I said, not totally useless, just not useful for most people. And we need to concentrate more on like the applied sciences, the applied math, things that they actually name textbooks that, and they go into all the silliness. Well, if I was going to design a curriculum for my children, now I don't have children, so they're all my children, I guess. But it's I would look at the curriculum and be like, what the hell are you trying to make them fail? Are you trying to make sure that they will have absolutely no interest in these subjects? Are you trying to make sure that we have a really dumb populace? And a lot of conspiracy theorists are kind of leaning towards the using education to destroy the intelligence of the populace. And there is a little bit of a truth to that, but I'm not going to go too much into that. I'm looking more for the solutions, not reading the problems, like reading the tea leaves of the problems in a kind of opinionated way and, waxing philosophical. It's really kind of, you need to get down to brass tacks and start from zero, and what do you want your kids to learn? I think a lot of what they learn in the earlier grades is kind of appropriate. But again, it's purely academic, and we don't need to be like that. Now, there were kind of two schools when it comes to education, traditionally. I don't know what the hell they're called. I'm sure that there are terms that academians use. But I call them the British and the German school. And this is based on my kind of experience with my family, kind of my family's history, which will be apparent in a second, and just kind of all the tidbits that give me this reading of the zeitgeist in history. Not history, not the zeitgeist at its current state, but what it was and what it's become because of that. Pre-World War II, we had these kind of two competing camps in the United States. There was the kind of British liberal arts type of camp, which believed that, reading all the classics and learning Latin, all this stuff kind of led to people being a good citizen. So it wasn't just in college. You would have these things in some of these really high-end schools where people would, they were very well educated, but often it was only in one of these two arenas. These kind of like super liberal arts kind of schools that followed more the British model. And then we had more of the German model, which was very applied, which was very like engineering and chemistry and math. It was like it's like basically the STEM people, and like you just figure a curriculum designed around that. So they had these two kind of competing ideas, and it was never decided. It was always just kind of they went back and forth. Well, my generation got a lot of liberal arts degrees, and they're absolutely useless at this point. So I'm kind of going to argue against that a little bit. But in the same token, the like full German, just, know how to build an engine type thing was a little bit crazy on that side. I think really it's almost like the nature nurture argument. You got to have kind of a mix of both or you don't have a person. Arts and sciences, liberal arts specifically, and the sciences, they kind of need to work in tandem. Some people might call it like an integrated kind of curriculum where you have people who might be good at one thing and not the other. And so you end up with kind of a splitting of people as far as their expertise, but they all learn the same things. In college, it's fine if you're so split off from everybody else and because you're specializing in something. Let's say it is like, designing and building engines, right? There's some sort of like engineering program. Or you're going to be a professor in academia and you're like a big, huge liberal arts person. The problem with liberal arts is that a lot of these courses you can only become a professor in. And I believe they have like a very big use in society. I believe like the German and the British tract are very useful, and we should never get rid of either. But we have to learn how to integrate them as opposed to just kind of going back and forth and having these like completely liberal arts colleges that don't really teach science very well and vice versa. Right? We've even gotten to the point where we have these kind of like little technical colleges all over that'll teach you like web design and how to build a computer, all these things. And of course, they have absolutely no impetus to teach you any kind of communication arts, any kind of music or anything like that. So we've kind of camped into these two camps, and I think that's very unhealthy because they both always needed each other because people need to have both sides of them explored. I know I sound kind of new agey, but it's also that it's not just this argument between the British and the German model. There's also this very real dumbing down of education and also kind of just funneling it into, language arts and math and everything else that you need to know to become a citizen is, with the exception of like early American history, it's all left out basically. Now, early American history is great because, of course, that's where we came from and that, why we had a revolution, blah, 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 would be nice to know. But there's a lot more history. And most people don't even get a taste of it until college. Now, do you have to have, let's say, African history from, or Egyptian history in the First Kingdom, and like a whole semester on that? No. But you could touch a lot more as far as what's gone on in the world. Than we do. And I think we should really change the name back to history and really try to actually be a truthful history and not just kind of report what the winners want to be true. And that's going to be a big job. We have these competing things where we have kind of the corporatist history, the kind of happy, fun, puppies and rainbows history. Even though, they're talking about wars, it's all kind of cartooned out. And then you have kind of this Howard Zinn's history, which is like this really bleak, probably equally as unrealistic kind of I don't know. I've never read Howard Zinn, but I mean I have, but not that much of it. So maybe in its entirety I'm misrepresenting it, but I have to kind of look more into that to see. So we have we've left out history, so that's a big thing. And that also goes kind of into basic law, at least like the common law that we follow, and the common laws that we follow, and how that works. What a lawyer is, what they have to do to represent a client, what bar they have to pass. Also, what's an adjudication, I'm trying to remember the word, when they rule that you have to go to trial. See, if I had a better education, I'd remember these words. What the hell is it? Well, I don't recall right now. Not in my notes. But we need to kind of know these things to be a citizen. And we've given up in such a almost ridiculous way that we've given up with such zeal that to us it doesn't look like we've given up. It's hard to kind of notice that there are so many things that should be in education that we're really being unfair to our children at this point. And honestly, it can be kind of go towards kind of being neglectful to the point of abuse. And I really think that we really need to base our society on helping younger people become good citizens and, get their lives together and, be what they want to be, or be what they can be what they want to be within what they can be. So what should be kind of like the common curriculum? So you'd have kind of like this history is a really great thing you could integrate with law, business law, civil law, criminal law. Right? All these things could kind of be taught within history. So you have this kind of integrated area already. And from that comes this kind of, at least an introduction to like the major milestones in philosophy. You don't have to like read Kant or, John Stuart Mill's and like go and read everything they ever wrote. In fact, I'm a big fan of Spark Notes. And in fact, we should have companies kind of competing, like Cliff Notes and Spark Notes. There should be like 20 other companies that try to explain things in a really concise way so we kind of know the history of it and what it means, as opposed to trying to read something in Old English or Middle English that we're not going to really understand anyway. That could be something that you could, read like these former texts in their entirety in maybe a college course if you're going into like the law or something like that. But it's not something that you'd really need in high school. You just want to know kind of what happened, right? It's kind of like the Reader's Digest condensed. We need to kind of use that mentality. And we also need to utilize the technology we have instead of just having a teacher in front of a classroom drone on. They could have all sorts of kind of interactive games that teach you things and make it more fun. And that should be a big, huge thing for us. That should be a major investment. In fact, I think that the Department of Education should be supplying grants to like video game companies to make educational games. They should, give awards to companies that do like, history in their games, like more accurately. Who knows? There's all sorts of things we could do utilizing these technologies and not just kind of ignoring them and, putting them in a computer science class. And when it comes to computer science, by the way, It's very easy to teach people the major components of a computer. It's very easy to teach people how to put in an operating system, how to, pick parts for a computer and build one. You can go to a bunch of these little technical schools and learn A+, but it's kind of overkill. You're probably not going to need to know that. Basics of networking would be good, basics of building a computer, and basics of making a website. Like the kind of Weebly level kind of making of a website, and then just kind of the command structure, and are we up to HTML10 or is, right now we're at 5, or, I don't think there's an X added to it. But yeah, it's just HTML5 now. These are things that could be put into the curriculum and that could really help people as they go on and try to figure out what they want. In a lot of ways, you want to put all these different things in so that people can get a really good taste of who they are, as far as, do they like this? Are they excited about it? Or are they just kind of, droning along? So it's something I think we really need to think about. And I have a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, speaking of civil, criminal, business law, there would also be kind of wrapped in that, almost like political science class, right? How to debate. There is some of that in high schools now. But we'd also want to add how to write a journalistic story, not an essay, how to write a 5-box internet journalism bit, and what that entails, right? We want to give people the tools to communicate. And one of those tools would be the basics of journalism. So like a little electronic journalism 101, how to conduct an interview, stuff like that. It could be very important and very useful. But also critical thinking and what an ad hominem attack is. And for those who don't know, that's when you're in an argument with someone or a debate, and they don't like what you're saying, so they tell well, I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if I could trust a man with a red hat, or I don't know if I trust a man who'd have facial hair like that. That's an ad hominem attack. It has nothing to do with the debate. It's all about, I'm going to attack you to kind of get the audience on my side. I'm either using humor or just insulting you and kind of solidifying my base by, making sure they know I hate you. And there's all sorts of other things I'm going to go into when I start doing more videos. Now, there's also, what about basic medicine? By the way, a lot of these things you're going to think, well, what about the parents? That's the thing. We don't really have them anymore. We've made our parents wage slaves. And there is no expectation of like a parent only working 40 hours so they have time to have with their kids. Or, maybe one parent doesn't work or only works part-time. There's no expectation of that. In fact, the expectation, and a very strong expectation, both parents work full-time, and full-time is God knows how many hours, right? Both parents should be workaholics. That is what we push here. And until we improve that, there's going to have to be some of these skills that were lost are going to have to be kind of taught in a school setting until we kind of figure out how to make parents relevant again. Because right now they're just irrelevant. There's really not... Most kids could survive about the same with or without their parents, as long as the money and the food was there, right? Parents don't cook for their kids anymore. They just bring them to a place that cooks, burgers or whatever. And even cooking has become kind of a rarity. It's a really big change from the kind of life. When I was growing up, I wasn't getting that type of like middle class life or lower class life or just family life at all, really. But I knew that would be better, right? I think a lot of kids today don't even think that. they have no way of knowing that ever happened. They'll probably see kids with actual, like a parent who's involved in their kid's life as being a bit weird at this point. They're like little mini adults with less rights at this point. And that's actually something we were trying to get away from, because back then when we had this kind of idea of children just being mini adults, that's when they ended up in, sweatshops, and all these kind of horrible child labor practices happened. So I hope we don't go back to that. But with that mentality, it's quite possible. So what are some of the things? Like I said, the parents aren't around. Remember when I hope everyone has some sort of memory of skinning their knee and one or both of their parents kind of, bandaged them up a little bit. But I could see at this point where there's a lot of people who haven't had that experience. A lot of parents are like, oh my God, emergency room, for anything. There's no expectation of parents knowing how to do these things. And because of that, we're probably going to need to kind of give parents back that knowledge. And we can only do that in high school. So that's where we should do it. So I would say like a basic kind of first aid type medicine. Just a couple of videos, maybe a couple of days of videos could really, really help. Teaching people like CPR, instead of having you, have to go down to the police station and go to one of their classes and, get certified. It should be like a basic skill that people have. Because, if your kid is choking, everyone in the room should know what to do. Right? Because if everyone in the room if everyone in the room doesn't know what to do, no one in the room is going to know what to do unless there's like a doctor handy. And let's admit it, most of the places that most of us are eating aren't many doctors around. In fact, I'd love to put schools next to hospitals, because kids hurt themselves all the time. They might as well, because God knows that parents can't help them. So you're kind of getting a theme here. One of the other things is that we used to have parents who kind of taught their kids about life. This harkens back to the era when they kind of spent most of their time on the farm. They'd have the 2 months off in the summer so that they could, go and help with the harvest. They were more part of a family. We don't have that anymore. We don't have family. We don't have community. So people aren't learning about people. And that quickly degrades into Lord of the Flies. So we really have to kind of inject psychology and human behavior and the basics of that into their lives so that they have a clue. And what's good is, throughout history, parents have been very bad teachers of these things and have said the dumbest things possible. All of us from kind of older generations, where their parents actually used to speak to them a little bit, there's this, you could always bring up a memory of something just so ridiculously inane that one of your parents brought up, right? I mean, that's part of being a child. You're going to have parents say ridiculous things. What's funny is maybe that's not something us losing is so bad. If we could kind of base their knowledge of human behavior and people more on science, at least where it's at now, and hopefully it continues to grow, because psychology, human behavior, very much a virgin science still. Only about 100 years, about 120 years since Freud, at least the bulk of his work. So we're still in a very kind of retarded, to use the phrase correctly, a retarded area. We're like a class 0 civilization as far as a world civilization. We're like point 0.5, not 1.0 yet. So there's going to be a lot of skills that people really need to kind of relearn. And some of those old skills as backups, using old tools, I'm sure there are so many like 14-year-old boys, if you gave them a shop, almost like a history of tools shop class, and showed them how people used to plane doors or how to make this and that, that you would never get them out of the shop class, right? And I'm not just talking about boys. I mean, there are women who love to build things, who love to use their hands like that. It's actually more of a common human trait. I would just say that maybe there's the bell curves are kind of skewed towards boys when it comes to this. I know you all know women who love to fix up things in their house or fix their cars and stuff like that, because they're free to now. Now it's not seen as it's a man-only job. I've seen my share of, women mechanics. There's actually a website from Great Bear, the area in New York I'm from, and they have a site called Women Ought to Know, like auto, AUTO, know, NOKNOW, and it's kind of a woman's club for women mechanics. So it's a pretty cool thing, and it's won a bunch of awards. Knowing all that stuff, knowing about cars, knowing what a slide rule does and kind of how to use it. And I'm speaking as somebody who's never used an abacus or a slide rule. But what happens if there's like the lights are out for a couple of weeks? Areas in New York, like after Sandy, oh my God, like people's houses floated away. Is a slide rule going to be the first thing you're going to need? Probably not, but having just some sort of backup. That's why I think we should stick with how we used to teach math, so that people could figure it out. If there's some sort of new way of doing it that makes it easier, okay. But is it? Like using math tricks doesn't, you just if you get confused about how to do the trick, you're not in any better situation. You're just kind of guessing at that point. So, and people can't look at and be like, oh, I divided 10,000 by 100, so it should be 100. 100 times 100 would be 10,000, isn't it? Okay, I may or may not be wrong about that, but you should kind of know the answer a little bit. You should do multiplication tables. You should do some of the old school kind of teaching of these basic things so that people actually remember them instead of just kind of pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. You in calculus yet? All right, and I really think calculus and pre-calc should be taken out of the high schools. People don't need to be competing on that shit. They're not STEM. Once they go into a STEM program, fine. But calculus and pre-calc and astrophysics, they don't need to be doing that shit yet. They need to learn about life. They need to learn skills that are going to help them, like how to change a tire, how an engine works, what an alternator and a starter are, like the basic engineering, almost that German thing I was talking about, but just kind of the knowledge of it. They don't have to sit there and build engines. I think you all get that I'm talking about almost like a basic 101 knowledge of all this stuff. And the reason to do that is you want to have as wide a knowledge as possible for a few reasons. One, that gives you a good idea of what you might want to do, as opposed to just, hey, go to college for 6 years and maybe then you'll figure it out and declare a major. Not a good way to do it, especially if you end up in a liberal arts college and you find out later that you wanted to be an engineer. You're not going to really be able to do that, and you're not going to have taken many of the classes that you needed. The other reason is that, like I said, as parents, we need to take care of our children. If you have them, and most people do, I'm a bit of an exception, and one day I'll go into that, maybe on my Patreon. But knowing the basic law, knowing basic first aid, knowing basic psychology, so you don't just have a child psychologist banging on your door saying your kid needs Ritalin. It's like, well, actually, my child has ring of fire ADHD as far as I can tell. I'm with them a lot. It would be great if parents were actually around their kids sometimes. And I have a decent education in this, and I think they have this type of ADHD, and Ritalin would actually be really horrible for them. It would make them worse. But none of us know that, all right? The guy who's the biggest guy in ADHD, Dr. Aben, which was a whole subject of my last show, and that's part of the reason that I went into that in such detail. We don't even know he exists for the most part. We're educated so lightly, with such little concern for the future of these people's lives, of these children's lives, that it seems by design. I'm not saying it is, but it's gotten to that point where people can think that, and it kind of makes a little bit sense in their world, right? And we shouldn't be at that point. So what do? We start teaching some real life skills and all that school can do is teach it from like an academic perspective. And, maybe you have shop classes and stuff like that. You have all sorts of things that could really utilize technology to help them along and to make it easier. No one said school had to be hard so that we could prove people are able to get up and go and go to the cubicle every day. We should kind of make the assumption that if there's not anything wrong with them, that they're going to be able to do that. A normal human can do that. We need services in these high schools and these junior high schools and before with real child psychologists, not just, people are going to send them to a psychiatrist for whatever pincushion experimenting with pills they get. We need to be better at that. We need to be better at what's called developmental psychology. And that's something that's, like I said, only 120 years since Freud. It's going to be hard. But it's something we need to do. And this is really what the Department of Education should be looking into. How do we help people become successful in life? And it's not math scores. That doesn't help. I knew a mathematician that was never employed. I don't think other than like teaching, he taught some music. He was a musician too. I don't think he was ever really employed, right? But he was a mathematician. He was brilliant. Didn't really prove anything. Didn't really get him work. And there's only so many people that can become math professors before it becomes kind of a moot point to even try. That's some good coffee. So, one of the things that I am astounded at, now people talk about kids not being able to use, kids today are what we make them. I mean, we're the ones in charge, I mean, yeah, there are some really oppositional children with like deadbeat parents. It's usually the case with really oppositional children. But most children are scared to death, right? They're scared to death of other children, much less the person who's 3 times their weight and has access to knives. Come on. We're going to blame them every generation, like every time we blame the kids for how much we screw up. We screw them up. We don't give them And we go, but I paid for stuff. And that is our claim to fame as parents. I paid for things. I opened my wallet. I'm generous. No, you weren't generous with your time. You never gave a thought as to what they need to know. You made everything else somebody else's problem. And if you pay for a lot of stuff, what you're doing is you're paying other people to make your children their problem. The nannies, the people in the school, the people in social services for children. You're just pushing your kids onto them. And we have to push against that, but at the same time realize that that's what's going on. And we may not be able to really do that much about it. So we have to kind of almost bring up a generation of decent parents, despite them having really crappy parents, for whatever reasons. And we need to stop blaming the kids like they popped out with some new plan. Like they all got together as souls in the pre-life, right? Some sort of, ether that they were hanging out in and said, let's really fuck up everything. Let's see what we can do to really drive our parents crazy. Whatever you believe in, I doubt that makes any sense to you, that happened, right? That's just a ridiculous statement. By the way, that's what I'm not sure if I'm using the phrase correctly, but I call that an ad ridiculum, where you make a kind of a ridiculous statement to make a point. Sometimes it's just a ridiculous extension where that doesn't apply at all, and sometimes it actually does kind of work. Anyway, that's another part of the whole critical thinking thing, because people will use the kind of ridiculous, and then you'll go, oh, wait, that doesn't apply to this. So watch out for those two. Ad hominem attacks. People often talk about critical thinking as being something that's not taught and we really should. I think that's really a small part of it. Of course we should teach critical thinking. Of course we should teach people how to read an article, how to understand politics, how to make an argument. All those things are good, and they need all of it. The only thing I'd argue they don't need is kind of the sugar-coated histories, the STEM math that you're really only going to find useful if you go into a STEM program. We shouldn't. Also, there's nothing wrong with being a mechanic, right? There are families all over this country that would aspire to their children being a mechanic. And whatever middle or upper class upbringing you had that teaches you that that's not a good job is just plain wrong. It's perspective. I mean, if everybody is working part-time at a fast food joint in your family and you're dependent on social services and you're like the typical kind of welfare recipient that only, I think welfare families tend to only work about 16 hours a week. So they have really bad jobs and they're not there very often. Usually what happens is they're out of work and then they get a job and they have decent hours or, part-time hours. So it kind of breaks down to 16 hours average. That's not exactly accurate, though. But they would love their kids to be a mechanic, right? They would love the kids to have some sort of kind of life. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a physicist. To people who, like I said, are on welfare, for 3 generations, they don't give a shit if their kid's a physicist or if they're a mechanic or if they're a street sweeper, as long as they have a decent job. And we've gone from, nobody in my family went to college, I'm the first one, and that was a big deal. Coming after the kind of the Depression, World War II, and these decades of college not being free, basically. Now you could get in and get out of college without paying much, as far as books and all that stuff, and even books can be paid for with vouchers. You'll get out with some debt, pretty much no matter what, even if you go to like a city college or whatever. But like you're allowed to have that debt. It's the only time you could have that debt without a job. How many banks are like, yeah, I'll give you, 50,000, and you don't need to work. You don't need to show that you have any kind of income to repay this. And it's codified in law, and it's actually a little bit ridiculous, but we'll go into that in some other show, the whole student loan scam. And the reason I bring this up is because there used to be kind of job training as far as being a secretary, being a mechanic, and these were in high schools too. Not only did we do a decent enough job teaching people what they needed for their future life, we also did a decent enough job to have some time left over to teach them how to be a secretary or how to do X, Y, and Z. And if you notice, most high school seniors are kind of in senioritis. They only have a partial day. And I guess that's a whole, well, you got to, be applying to colleges and all that. How about learning the skills that will make them more useful to a college? Make them better students, that make them better at life. It's a long-going argument that academia often doesn't do these things, but we're talking about a school system, not an academia system. And we could teach whatever the hell we want in that. That's up to us. That's why I love the whole idea of states' rights in education. I love these kind of like alternative schools. Some of them are probably doing awesome things. I mean, it would be great to learn gardening when you're like 13 or 14. You know how many people will take to that? Gardening, being an automotive mechanic, being a secretary, being a paralegal. There are so many things that we could get into high school that it's really ridiculous how little we do. And here's the thing that happens. The other concerns always override, right? Oh, this school's in the Bronx. If we give them like metal shop, they'll just make knives, right? So there's this kind of, I wouldn't call it like socioeconomic racism, classism. Because I could see people making that argument, whether it's a poor white or poor Spanish or poor Asian, poor black, whatever, you're poor. So you're automatically kind of a criminal in a lot of people's eyes. So you can't have shop class because people be making weapons. You can't not have shop class. We need to think that way. You can't not have things that would interest other people. I'm not just talking about boys, right? Because I know women are doing better in academia right now. And I'm not just talking about for boys. I'm talking about for people who just like that thing. Gardening is not, necessarily effeminate. Yes, you could plant lots of flowers, but you can also grow tomatoes. There are plenty of, when I was growing up, 50-year-old Italian guys growing tomatoes and everything else in their backyard. And no one considered them a little weird. We need to look at how to use a sewing machine, how to mend a sock. I think it would be a very different mentality of permanent American products. See, here's the thing. Back when we started becoming really successful at being an industrial nation, we made the permanent stuff. Now, permanent, I don't mean, 100,000 years from now, they're going to find, a tractor somebody built. That'll be like, rusted out, and it'll be just a pile of red dust. I'm talking about things that were worth fixing as opposed to replacing. Now, if you have slave labor in a foreign country making something, then you just get another one, and it should be really cheap. But let's say you want a blender, but you don't want to buy one every 3 years because you actually use them a lot, and every time you make some frozen drinks, maybe you live in Florida like I do, you make a lot of frozen drinks, and suddenly it's like you go through a blender like every season because they're shit. They're slave labor bullshit, and they're not made to really last. Maybe you want to get a blender that lasts. Maybe you want a bar. Maybe you want to start a business, right? You can't do that with these disposable products. There has to be some nation on the earth. Right now, it's really more the European Union and a certain group of nations within that have very good heavy industry. And they're pretty much supplying the world, like Miele vacuums. These are like the vacuums that every American vacuum used to be this tough, right? I remember at one point I was selling Miele vacuums, and they're made in Germany, and they look like they're made in Germany. And when you bang them, stand on them, kick them, all the things that like a housekeeper does, or a housewife does, or a house husband, the abuse destroys like every other vacuum. But that's all we have. Crap made by slave labor in foreign countries, mostly China. And it's given us this mentality of things are just like, why fix anything? But you know what? Miele Vacuums has its own repair shops just for Miele vacuums because they're so worth fixing. We need to kind of get back to that mentality. Even those things have gotten cheaper. The things that were typical American, like, what's it called? I think All Clad makes a whole bunch of stuff for restaurants. So it's really hardcore stainless steel type stuff. Thick gauge, made in Pittsburgh, really good company. But they every once in a while will stick Emerald's face on a box and put out some like cheap little tin version of what they do. So even they kind of go back and forth with price points. You know, they have their made in China line that nobody wants to buy, but they end up doing it because, hey, I can't afford real All Clad, right? Not a commercial for All Clad, by the way. So, get rid of these weird expectations we have in education that before you can go to college, you need to know calculus. Most people don't ever get there. So why are we discriminating? You know, why are we like throwing away most people and saying, okay, your career is based on this? What if there was a bunch of psychology and human behavior classes and they aced the shit out of it? You're going to say, you know what, you should not go to college for psychology because you're not that great at calculus. What if they're like me? I don't even know what calculus really is. But I was awesome at statistics because I was big on psychology and I could see that statistics, I could understand what they mean. So I could kind of apply the math. And so for me, math is a matter of application. If I could figure out what it's actually doing, I'm good, right? I'm an A student. But when I got, I think, to Algebra 3 or something, I was like, raw, like negative, exponents, but it'd be like negative 4/5, like power to negative to the 4/5 power, like that, like my brain just turned to jelly. I hit a wall. Should I have really needed to know that? And this is not an argument that is new. Everyone's like made this argument when they were in those classes, except for the kids who were really good at math. Accounting is another thing. Again, basic. It's arithmetic in a lot of ways. You just need to know a few simple concepts. And then you could like read when your accountant brings you papers, because you own a business, let's say, you could look at it with a high school education and go, oh, okay, we're losing money. We have a net loss, and know what that means. It doesn't mean you have no revenue. It means that your overhead was greater than your revenue. And I'm sure that sentence made people go, huh? You see that's why we need to be educated in these things. That's why we need to be educated in how to form a corporation and what it means. What's limited liability? What the hell is that? Just for your edification, that means that, let's say you're in a corporation and you're either like the president of it, or you're on the chair, or you're on the board, or you're just one of the owners of the stock, right? Now remember, this is venture capitalism. Think of that word venture. So let's say you put in a money towards this venture, this little adventure somebody's going on. And it's actually related to sending ships to foreign lands, but that's like a whole big history lesson I won't get into. So let's say you have this thing where you're all throwing in, you and a couple of other people are throwing in to have this venture. And it loses money, right? Now, maybe it loses more money than the company is worth. Well, you take the worth of the company, whatever assets it has, another word everyone should know, like its land, its plant, its equipment, whatever assets it has, even its good name could be an asset, and you sell that off and pay your creditors first. That's part of the deal of this limited liability thing. At the end of that, maybe there's no money left over, so you lost all the money you put into it. Now, the creditors can't turn around, let's say it's a legitimate corporation, because there are times when people have kind of illegal corporations. They can't turn around and say, well, they got a bunch of dividends, right, which is like a yearly, well, I don't know if it has to be yearly, but they give out some money based on how many shares of stock you have, right? And they'll declare, 15 cents per share or something. They'll have some sort of dividend, and the owners get part of that. Well, this guy got a bunch of dividends from this while the company was running, and I want to sue him personally. Now, anybody can sue anybody for anything, but under the law, you're going to have a very hard time getting anything from him or her. The investor is not legally responsible, so they're only responsible for what they put in. So if they bought those shares and they gave in this money, and then the company goes belly up, they're only responsible for what they paid for those shares because they just lost that. Now, under a liquidation of a company, when everything's sold off, and which is what I was talking about before, and there's some left over, let's say, it's a big simplification, but some left over, and all the creditors are paid off. Who knows? Maybe you had some very expensive land, and you got a good made good when you sold that, and now there's money left over. Then the owners, the stockholders, get a cut of that based on how many shares they had. But because they're the first to lose money, because it's a venture, they enjoy something called limited liability. You should know what that is. And a lot of these things are intertwined. Basic business law is intertwined with, of course, business, but also critical thinking, common law, and how it applies and how it doesn't apply. Human behavior. A lot of times there are expectations based on what a normal person would do. What's normal? How do you figure that out? And you need to know a little bit of human behavior. And a lot of these things kind of slide together in these, kind of like cogs coming together. And the world isn't math, English, and social studies. It just isn't. There's a lot more involved. And there's a lot, you're going to need to know a lot more to deal with life. When your car breaks down, what do you do? But if it's just changing a tire, you're going to pay for AAA to change a tire. Maybe that's worth it. Maybe it's not. How do you know? When is it worth it? How do you know how much money you make and how much you could spend? And some kind of basic accounting could really help that. Knowing what a debit and a credit is. Really, debit and credit means right side, left side. But what does that mean? These basic concepts that can be taught to pretty much anybody in high school, most people are going to understand it. It's going to do some very good things. One, you're not good at, let's say, English, but you're great at accounting, business law, right? Like you can communicate. You're not like horrible at English. There's always going to be kind of like these minimum standards, but it's not your thing. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff you're great at. As long as we kind of create a curriculum that includes a lot of these things people might go on to do as careers, they're going to get a kind of a self-esteem boost. Oh, I'm really good at this. The only esteem boost you can get from like math, English, and social studies is, I'm smart. And that doesn't really help. Right? It doesn't help you feel like you're prepared for anything by being, I'm smart. That's just kind of a bragging point, and it doesn't really hold any water after high school, right? It might help you get into a good college nowadays. But you still won't know how to change a tire. You won't know the difference between an oil paint and an acrylic paint. Think about that kind of thing. What if you're in the store, the paint store, and there are paint stores now, and you want to paint your walls, and you see this really nice color, but it's an oil paint. You pick it up, you go and buy it, and now it's on your walls, and it never dries, like ever, because it's oil. And oil paints take forever to dry. You could have kind of gotten away with going, I don't think I want to use the oil paint on that. That's really just for painting, on a canvas, Okay, that's a weird kind of example. You go to a mechanic, you know a little about what's in an engine and that kind of stuff. The mechanic can explain to you what's wrong, and you look at it and go, I just really need to do a brake job. I can do one of those. I looked on YouTube how to do it. I know the basic parts of cars from like high school, and you go and you do your brake job. A lot of them are actually really easy. A lot of things on cars are very easy now, a lot easier than they used to be. Now you can go, if that's the problem, thanks for your time. Here's $50. I'm going to go do this thing you want to charge me $2,000 for like $500. Right? Your money is, your wealth. You want to just throw it away at people? Just like give people, like pay for their kids' college while you can't afford to send yours? So money, finance, law, mechanics, all these things we deal with, why not teach them in high school? I mean, what father wouldn't want their kid to know these things? Mothers are a little weird. It depends on the type of woman in a lot of ways. Men are a bit more homogenous, although they can vary a lot too. But I would hope that any pair of parents, and we used to have that all the time. Not everybody had a single parent household, which is much more prevalent today than it ever was. A caring group of parents, a caring pair of parents, used to really give a lot of information to their kids, teach them a lot. But they're just not there anymore. And the skills that a lot of people had, they just don't have anymore. Forget about just growing vegetables. What about canning them? What about making all sorts of food, cooking? Like all these things that were skills for just life, we've given up on. And in a lot of ways, we've taken... Because if somebody finds pleasure, let's say, in cooking, which a lot of people do, but academically they're not great at much else, they could go to cooking college, right? Cooking school. But while they're in high school, they're learning these things that they're probably already above, like by high school they could be way beyond, like, the typical 50s housewife. Why not let them have that? Why not do right by them? We always talk about putting more money into education, but we don't talk about putting more education into the schools. Help them grow. That should really be kind of the point of it, shouldn't it? So, a lot of these things I'm going to be going into because I think it's time for everyone to have a better education. So I'm going to be going into law and thinking and debating and journalism, medicine, human behavior, using old tools, how to mend a sock. I won't be going into trig, I'll tell you that, although it's something I kind of want to learn in a lot of ways to finish my education, but the other thing that I didn't mention before I go, we have all these books that are classics and are canonized and stuff like that, but we're like hundreds of years from when we used to speak, like, 1500s for William Shakespeare? So yes, it's wonderful that William Shakespeare had these great plays or whatever. But maybe it would be better to know about the plays, like what happened in The Tempest, what happened in Julius Caesar, and just sit there and fucking read them line by line. Like, what's really the point of that? You could give an example of it as a point of not reading it. Like, here's one page of it. Now do you know why we don't just let you read it? Chaucer, amazing. I love Chaucer, but kind of an acquired taste. It's a different type of English than we use, but knowing what his works were, and I have this great book. I'm going to be putting up books on my site when I get my site together, called An Incomplete Education, and it does exactly that. It tells you what the story was about, what the book was about, like what's important to kind of take away from it. Maybe some important passages they'd give you as well, and like really go into how to understand the passage. But they wouldn't make you read the whole fucking thing. Do you know how much you could learn about old books? And because it's also part of history. Remember, a lot of books really affect the society at the time because that's all they had. They didn't have anything other than books. They just had a printing press. At least before digital computing and all that, that's really all we had. So books were very important. Knowing what was important about whatever publication, book, whatever, is more important than actually knowing literally what it said. And again, you can have like the more detailed stuff happen in college if people want to go into that. And hopefully they won't go into like Sanskrit or underwater basket weaving. The history of underwater basket weaving, the kind of jokes we make about liberal arts being so useless. Hopefully people won't choose to do that. But if you gave them enough subjects where they could really figure out what really appeals to them, then they won't end up in college kind of looking around for every 101 to figure out who and what and what they're going to do, what job they could really perform. You're teaching a man to fish rather than giving them a fish, if you understand what that means in this context. So that's it for me. But like I said, I really am going to be going into detail a lot of these subjects. I love a lot of these subjects because they feel to me like, oh my God, I know what I'm doing. Somebody showed me, I won't mention who, but somebody showed me a gun today. I was like, oh, that's a Glock 17. It's going to be a little big for conceal and carry, and our state is conceal and carry. If you have it out in a holster, fine, as a security guard or something like that, or a cop. But if you're trying to put a Glock 17 in your pants, it might be a little uncomfortable because it's a bigger weapon. In fact, a better weapon, especially for reliability, might be, like a hammerless .38 revolver, a 2-inch or less barrel. And the guy looked at me and was like, how do you know all this shit? And I was like, because I want to educate myself in the way that people need to be educated, not the way I was told I should be educated. And I look forward to your ideas on that as well. And what do you think would be a great thing to learn if you could run the Department of Education and kind of do a study as far as, could we put this in the classrooms? What would you want studied? What would you want included? How do you think we could include it? What kind of ways could we use computers and all these things, all this new technology in order to put more in to high school as opposed to just kind of, we taught you some math and some English. This is what a dime looks like. All right, good luck. I don't want us to have 13th grade. I want college to be college. And maybe not all of us should go. But it shouldn't be a choice as in, oh my God, if I don't go, I'm not going to know what a computer looks like. All right? So I look forward to your ideas, and maybe you totally disagree with me, and that's okay too. So your interactions and your comments, always love them. All right, peace.